Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ramadan Mubarak. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Healthy Muslim in Ramadan. There's a Latin term, mens sana in corpore sano. That means healthy mind in a healthy body. The Christians may have been the forebears of Muslims, but it's very clear that the Muslims learnt from the Christians, and the attention to the peace of the mind and the trouble that some people have when they get upset, in grief, in anger, in anxiety, in depression, in the different states of mind that make people feel ill at ease. It is clearly understood that these states of mind are associated with illness, and that mind-body principle was not only practiced by the early Christians and the Jews before them, but it was fundamental to Islamic medicine. No physician would dream of interpreting the symptoms of his patient before knowing who he was talking to in the totality of his personality. But how do we know who we are, and how do we come to be that person who is I? What is the self, and where is the soul? I went to a conference in America once, in New York, and it was called The Self from Soul to Brain. Very interesting title, implying very clearly that who you perceive yourself to be has some contribution from the neurological investment of your brain. What is this in terms of its capacity, which can be genetic, inherited intelligence, inherited talents, and so on. We know this is very important. But also the sense of self has a spiritual dimension, has a soul. And how does the one affect the other? The self is poised in between these two dimensions. I deeply regret that at this conference that balance was not maintained, because there was a nervousness among the physicians and among the psychologists and among the different people, neurophysiologists, sociologists, who were making a contribution. There was a nervousness of discussing anything that had to do with the spiritual principle. One rather brave lady from a Christian college gave a nervous introduction about what she thought the soul might be, giving as its interpretation the life of God in the heart as being grace, and the soul being the ability to conceptualize and understand that there is a God. I think even if you can't conceptualize, your soul is still there. So I wasn't on message with her. But it fell on deaf ears. There were no questions, and her contribution was not referred to again. That is where the understanding of the spirit-body-mind interface is in today's world. As I think some of you may understand by now, I deeply regret that. I think the dimension of spiritual understanding is essential to the concept of the self, of who am I. But the two are interdependent. I had spoken about an experiment in a psychiatric unit where people who came in with a multiplicity of depression, obsessional disorder, hallucinations, anxiety, whatever. They were asked a question on admission: do you believe in God? If so, how do you conceive him? What is your view? And when they left, they were asked the same questions, and again 6 months later. And depending on their psychological recovery, their image of their God changed. In Hadith Qudsi, it says, Allah says, I am as you think me to be. In other words, I can only exist in your imagination in a limited way. You cannot know who I am. But if your personality is at ease, is in balance, you will have a different understanding of who I am, and you will be able to engage in an easier way in your spiritual life. The early healers attended to the depressions, the anxieties and the troubles of the people who were physically sick or who were psychologically sick. They attended to their grief as a grief which was human, not necessarily in its spiritual dimension. They also attended to it in its human dimension. So the psychologists, there are many schools of psychology, there are many ways by which people try to contribute to the understanding of how do I know who I am. And as the early Islamic thinkers knew, it's very complicated. I know myself, first of all, because of my generic inheritance and mental capacity. Secondly, I know myself for the 5 years where I can't remember what happened, but I had an input from my parents and from the environment in which I was brought up as a very young child. That environment might have been harsh. That environment might have been loving. In my case, I was lucky. I was loved. Some children are abandoned. Some children are brought up well and then suddenly and abruptly lose their parents in war. What happens? They become silent. They don't move. They don't run. They don't speak. They curl up on the floor. It's called the fetal position. They resort to being a baby, which is the last time they can remember being secure and safe. It's an instinct. It's universal across all cultures. So terrible trauma can happen to you before you even knew what happened. And as you reach consciousness being around about the age of 5, I mean, you're certainly very vital and very real and a very definite individual by that time, but you won't remember it. So your informed consciousness starts around 4 to 5. And then multiple influences control you. Where do you live? How much nutrition have you? Who looks after you? Is it your mother? Is it your granny? Are you able to play them away from each other? Is one harsh with you, the other kind? What is your culture and tradition? All of these things form your sense of who you are. An African person in a village has their own culture. An aristocratic English person has theirs. They're not the same. But the human that is produced as a result of that has their own equanimity and balance because of what they understand of their environment. No psychologist can interpret anything that happens until he understands the totality of that dimension. And it's part of the skill of the psychologist to uncover buried memories of pain, of grief, of trauma, of abuse, which the person may have shelved, but is now affecting their adult or later life. That's the skill of the psychologist, to help the person to be a confident, happy person who wakes up knowing that they can make a contribution to this world, that they have a song to sing, that they are loved and can love, and that there is a point to them being on this planet. That's psychology. There is no spiritual dimension in that study, because they're not telling the person what to do with their life. They're merely shepherding the resources that will enable optimal functioning. I've used similes of motor cars. The psychologist is a very good mechanic of the car, but he's looking perhaps not at the motor car itself, which is the human body. And, you know, if it's got a bit cranky, it could be the thyroid's going wrong, or if it's extremely tired, it needs some petrol in its tank. What the psychologist is looking at is the driver. Why is the driver not getting optimal performance out of the car? The car includes the human brain. Mens sana in corpore sano. We need the balance between mind and body. Come back after the break, because I want to explain to you why the psychologist needs to understand the spiritual dimension. Welcome back. Any psychologists who may be listening may now find what I'm going to say deeply controversial, because there is very little understanding of the spiritual dimension necessary for the full development of the human personality. When I say very little, I don't mean none. And I'm very glad to see that the spiritual traditions are now being welcomed in the field of psychology, and there are some rigorous and good studies being done. I've been offered a PhD thesis recently, and it's extremely interesting. Unfortunately, what I see is that there tends to be an insistence on one faith dimension rather than another, and that belongs to religion, which is not the same thing as what I'm talking about, which is the ultimate fitra. Spirituality, meaning that the human personality has to understand himself in the context that he is a created being, responsible to get the best out of all the talents he's been given, and to be accountable to his Lord. The spiritual dimension of psychology applies to everyone, those with religion, any religion, and those with no religion, because there is powerful spirituality within people who perceive themselves not to have a religion, but their spirituality is beauty, their spirituality is healing, their spirituality is love. Don't tell me that is not the path of Allah, whether they know it or not. Allah manifests himself not necessarily in the conscious preoccupation of our intellectual pursuit of religion, but in our deepest instincts to do good and to reverence each other and to reverence the creation. Political movements are founded by people who don't mention religion, but they've been set up to protect the earth. They are doing the work of Allah. They are deeply spiritual. They may not pray, and they may not know that they are doing anything that has anything to do with anybody's religion. And they'd probably be horrified to be told that they are. But the concept of spirituality in psychology has to be broadened, because one of the problems that happens in religion when it comes to the personality development is that religion is associated with moral values, and you may have to interfere or perhaps discuss some of the problems in religious upbringing which have resulted in harm to the personality of the person you find coming to you. The person might be depressed or anxious. They might have deep shame. And you find that they have deep shame associated with guilt to do with sexuality. They have been told that the natural expression of their sexuality in sleep shows that they are a deeply wicked and dreadful person, and God will send them to hell. This is natural physiology. A child can't help it. But some religions love to have control, especially control of the darker side of someone, to make someone feel guilty and awful and bad. Of course, Allah is a judge. Of course, Allah can punish. We know these are names of Allah, but they are overwhelmingly influenced by His mercy and His love. Man is made to fail. Religion can make him feel subhuman, a homunculus, a worm and no man, because he has done what he was born to do, to fail. When we fail, when we sin, we must cast ourselves on the mercy of Allah and help ourselves to do better, to avoid that sin in the future. So, as a child develops moral values, those moral values will be part of the culture of his time, and religion may be part of that culture. It may be a force for good, it may, I regret to say, be a force for bad. So the psychologist must be patient and understanding of the totality of where the person has come from. I was troubled. I had a psychoanalysis. It was very interesting. I came to psychoanalysis depressed. I was looking for love in all the wrong quarters. There's a lovely there's a lovely song about that. It's sad. And it personified what my life was at that time. I was making many mistakes. I didn't understand why I was making no mistakes, and I needed help to understanding. I was intelligent. I was doing really well in terms of my profession. I was emotionally illiterate. You can be intelligent and illiterate at the same time very easily. Currently, I'm spiritually illiterate, but I'm trying to acquire literacy. I'm getting that. But it's taken me until my later years to understand the real dimension of spiritual literacy and spiritual wisdom, and to learn them in my own heart. But returning to my psychoanalysis, my analyst was lovely, a wise man. I only discovered after he died that he was an atheist, or professed to be an atheist. I clearly came to him a Catholic. I clearly came to him with a religious and spiritual dimension, which was very important to my life. And at no point in the intimacy of our analysis did I think that he was anything other than fully supportive and understanding and knowledgeable and approving of my need for a moral dimension within the compass of a religion, and that religion was the Catholic religion. But somewhere along the line of the analysis, something quite sweet happened. I was trying to work out how this healing of analysis happened. What was it that he was uncovering which was helping me to be calmer, helping me to be less irritable, helping me to be more confident, helping me to see things as they were and not as I wanted them to be, and many other mistakes that I was making. And somehow it was working. I didn't know how the medicine was working. I was trying to analyze it. So I said to him, I think I understand now how psychoanalysis works. When you're a baby, you don't know what's going on. You have no memory before the age of 5. And from 5 onwards, you're guided. Other people are pulling your strings and telling you what to do, and you follow them because you love them. You want to please them. You haven't got your own will and your own judgment independently. And you assume that what you are given is perfect. Of course your parents are perfect. Of course everything that's happening to you is as it should be. And you don't know that you're actually living a nightmare. I was sent to boarding school at 5½. I saw my parents once a year. Paid people look after me in the holidays. They were very good to me. They were very sweet. I remember many of them with gratitude. But they weren't my parents. They didn't know me. I went to a school where I was one of a group of children. I had to behave like one of the group. I'll tell you a secret. I didn't. I was what's called naughty. If there was something I could do to make the nuns miserable, I did it. With relish, with vigour, and with delight. That is healthy. That is called the child's instinct for the self. But now, that instinct is in the service of Allah. I've greatly enjoyed this talk. Go on your own journey and find the balance. Assalamu alaikum.